According to the Fruits and Patriots, Liquor Shields, Ditch Lacers, Peasants, Vassals, Minions, Meat Sacks. I'm Useful Idiot, welcome. And today I want to talk about the fact that apparently Israel and both Israel and the Trump administration are discussing the idea of massive airstrikes on Iran and their nuclear facilities. And I haven't read anything that makes it sound like it's coordinated, but I would assume that any action by either would probably involve combined efforts. But this brings up a whole bunch of points I'd like to make thinking about this. First of all, of course, is the Wesley Clark list from 2007, where the U.S. had a number of governments, I think 7 in all, that they intended to topple after 9/11. And Iran is the last country on that list. So well done, American Empire. So it seems like the idea of keeping pressure on Iran and eventually creating enough pressures that there's regime change in Iran would ultimately be the goal. But also this idea of neutering any potential nuclear program they have, which would obviously complicate things in a big way in that region. And then another point is the fact that I did a video about the fact that Iran had discussed the ideas that they had accelerated certain elements of their nuclear program and could potentially put together a nuclear bomb within a week. And I did a video on that, but I kind of have to backtrack a little bit because one of my points over the last several decades is the idea that Netanyahu has been warning about Iran being a week away from having a nuclear bomb, and he's been given those warnings for 40 years, over and over and over, and the U.S. government has done the same. And ultimately, I still believe that Iran has not been pursuing a nuclear arms program, and a lot of it has to do with their religious beliefs. But the fact is, as well, if Iran did already pursue nuclear weapons, we'd be having a completely different discussion. So that's a point to keep in mind. The next point to keep in mind is that, of course, Israel finds this a ripe opportunity to do airstrikes in Iran because, first of all, they've already done some, and they've been doing sporadic airstrikes all over the region with impunity. And now that Syria has been taken out as a factor, and that Israel could enter in and out of Syria's airspace to do these Iranian airstrikes makes a lot of sense militarily. And another point I'd like to bring up, and probably one of my biggest points, it's interesting that Trump is the one who discontinued the agreement to have UN and IAEA observers in Iran monitoring their nuclear programs, and Trump discontinued that agreement. So, you know, it left the U.S. and the West really not knowing what is going on with Iran's nuclear program. At least under that agreement, we had some way of monitoring and knowing what was going on, but that was thrown out the window. So now we have this idea of doing these strikes being discussed by both the Trump administration and Israel. Another point I want to bring up too, that I brought up before, it's so interesting that we live in this age where war is just a matter of fact. It's not, there's no formality to it anymore. There's no, a lot of these areas where there's all these conflicts, there's no declaration of war, whether it's Ukraine, Lebanon, or Iran, and that we have these tit-for-tat airstrikes and missile strikes going on all over the Middle East, and for all intents and purposes, there's no war declared. So I think that points to the fact that in the 21st century, parliamentary bodies in Congress, who are supposed to be the ones making the decisions to go to war and declaring war, that's a formality that's not even bothered with anymore. So now we live in a world of perpetual regional wars everywhere, and no actual wars are declared. And then the last thing I want to bring up about this is that it's interesting that Trump is sort of thought of as being an anti-war president because he didn't start any new wars while he was president. Although, as I pointed out in the video I did at the time, as soon as he took office, he bombed Yemen. So I think it's very important to point out a distinction between the fact that Trump might not necessarily start any wars, but he's not afraid of being in one or continuing one because, for example, he has no issues whatsoever with Israel's strategies right now of the complete destruction of Gaza, as well as incursions into Lebanon. He seems to have no problem with threatening to retaliate a lot heavier against Yemen than the Biden administration has done for continued attacks in the Red Sea. And so this is, for me, this is a kind of a pivotal moment thinking about Trump, because one of the things that appealed to me about Trump was this anti-war stance, but it seems like he has no problem with war, but it's going to be on his terms. And so that'll be something to look forward to moving forward the next 4 years. Of course, a lot of this is public rhetoric. It's one thing we always have to remember about discussions of military strikes and the ideas of war. A lot of these people, first of all, leaders of these countries are playing to their bases, and second of all, a lot of it is in the age of information and the war using information. Public perception is one element, and then also just playing strategy using the careful release of information that may or may not be true, and in this case, making it public through the press that Israel and the Trump administration are both considering strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities could just be part of the strategy, and maybe isn't something that will manifest. But anyway, once again, this spread of violence and undeclared war and tit-for-tat missile strikes and airstrikes continues to just envelop the entire Middle East, and just a whole new phase to this region and the maladies it's had for 50 to 75 years. And of course, the other question is, what is Trump going to do about the fact that U.S. troops occupy and transport oil from a third of Syria? So now there's a new government in control in Syria, and a third of the country is occupied by U.S. troops. And so that's going to be an interesting thing to watch moving forward as well. What is going to be the Trump administration policy on that? I know he's talked before about the idea of getting the U.S. out of Syria, and he's made it clear now that he doesn't want to engage in any kind of conflicts or hostilities with Syria. So it's hard to comprehend that that at some point when Trump actually gets into office, they're going to come to some agreement where a third of the country will remain in U.S. will remain in U.S. control. So anyway, as usual, it's a world gone mad. I find it hard to believe I'm seeing the things I'm seeing on a daily basis. I'm a useful idiot, don't you be one too?